if you applaud before, I can just leave now, right? So you have to wait till I'm done. I actually want to say two quick things off the top. One is, it's one of the great things about these seminars, and I've been teaching at fee seminars for 10 years, at IHS seminars for 15. One of the great things about them is, I mean, obviously you get a chance to come and listen to people talk and give you all kinds of good ideas and things to read and all that. But one of the best resources you get out of these is each other. And it's really important and valuable, I think, for you guys to find ways to keep in touch with each other. And back in the old days, you know, BI, before the internet, or at least before Facebook, that was more difficult. But I would really encourage you guys, and I've seen a lot of Facebooking going on computers out and about, but find ways to keep in touch with each other after the seminar is over. You'll find that each other are very important resources in all kinds of different ways. I'm on Facebook as well. So if you decide you want to go that way, you can do that. If you make a friend request of me, though, it would be very helpful if you send me a note and identify yourself as someone who was at the fee seminar in June. That way I'll know who you are, rather than you being some, as my kids would say, some random guy off the internet. Okay? That's my first thing. So keep in touch with each other and use each other as resources. The second thing I wanted to say off the top, and this actually relates, kind of a nice lead into my talk, I think. In my talk yesterday or last night, I perhaps gave the impression that I was more sympathetic to the Fed than I really am. And I want to just say two quick things about that. I think there's two things one can say as an Austrian economist that are completely consistent with each other. One is, given that we have a central bank, what can Austrian economics say, or are there ways that Austrian economics can suggest how that central bank can do its job better or worse, right? That's a perfectly reasonable position to take, given that we have one. At the same time, one could say, if I had a button in front of me that I could push and make the Fed disappear, I would push it, okay? Those are not inconsistent with each other. And so some of the questions that came up last night really dealt with, okay, so how do we deal with what we have? So that I hope that's clear. And I think where Paul ended the last talk is a perfect lead into today. I really like that he chose to end by sort of emphasizing the ways in which Austrian economics is not monolithic. There are debates and discussions and differences among Austrian economists. And certainly the relationship between Austrian economics and the rest of the economics profession has some of those same elements to it. And those are all themes I want to talk about this morning. And what I'm hoping to do is sort of do two things at once. I'm going to give you kind of a combination of pep talk and warning at the same time this morning. At least that's what my goal is. I'm going to try to hold myself to about 45 minutes and leave a good, we'll see, maybe more than that. As much time as I can for Q&A, because you'll see at least my fourth thing I'm going to talk about today, I suspect will raise lots of questions. So, there we go. So I have 4 questions I want to frame this talk around. Okay? First, what are the major institutional sites where Austrian ideas are being promoted and advanced? Where is Austrian, literally, where is Austrian economics today? Second question, what are the key questions and research agendas that modern Austrians are pursuing? That is, what are people like me, like Paul, like Ivan and Jean and everyone else who's been here this week, Larry White, what are they doing? What are we researching? What are the questions we're asking? What's the standing of Austrian economics within the economics profession? That is, how do we as Austrian economists relate with all those other schools of thought that Paul was just talking about? And finally, what's the relationship between Austrian economics and libertarianism? Because I think that's a question, at least based on some conversations I've had with folks in the last 18 hours, certainly a question that's been a kind of ongoing thing this week, and I think we need to put it on the table and talk about it a bit. Okay? And the major, I think, thing that unites all these, and what I want to say this morning, is that Austrian economics as an intellectual enterprise is very much alive and well. But more important, again, picking right up where Paul left off, it's a living and growing school of thought. It's defined not, it's so funny he said this, it's in my notes, not by the answers it gives, but by the questions it asks and the way it asks them. It's not a liturgy to be learned and memorized and preached to the unconverted. It's a framework for understanding the world. We as Austrian economists don't have all the answers. Okay? But those of us who do this work think that we've got better answers and think that the way we go after those issues is the best way to get the best answers possible. Okay? The other thing that falls out of that is understanding that Austrian economics is part of the economics profession. Okay? It's important. I mean, one of the things that FEE does and does really well and has for 60 plus years is to communicate these ideas to the general public. Okay? And I think it's important that the public understands those ideas. But it's also the case that it's part of the professional conversation in economics. And people with PhDs in economics who produce Austrian economics are engaged in a somewhat different activity than people who consume Austrian economics in the public. And that's important to keep in mind as well. And I think one of the things that's really important for Austrians to do is to bring our ideas to the public through things like the Freeman and other kinds of publications. Okay? So, let's kind of go through these one by one. Now, there's the themes. I forgot I had that slide in there. All right. Notice the animation's working. I'm not working today. So all right. Homes of Austrian economics. I'm going to focus on two. Certainly FEE is one home of Austrian economics, but I want to focus on two that produce kind of academic type Austrian economics. The first is the Mises Institute, which is in Auburn, Alabama. The Mises Institute, some of you may be familiar with their website, familiar with them through their website, mises.org. One of the great things, in fact, I think one of the best things about their website and about the Mises Institute is they have been extraordinarily effective at putting all kinds of books and articles and journals online. It's a tremendous resource for people who do Austrian economics to be able to access the work that they've been able to get up in PDF format and others online. So that's a terrific thing that they've done and very useful for people who do this work and students who want to learn about it. They also publish the QJAE, which is the quarterly journal of Austrian economics. You'll see in a minute. There's two major academic journals in Austrian economics. This is the one that's produced by the folks associated with the Mises Institute. Many of the old issues are online there at their site. Again, that's one of the things they've been able to do, I think, very, very effectively. One way of thinking about their approach to Austrian economics, and I'm going to use a word to describe it here. I'm not sure they would use this word, but it's the word I would use, which is an internalist strategy. Okay, that is, a lot of what the folks at the Mises Institute are interested in is kind of building Austrian economics from the inside out. Sort of focus on talking to other Austrians, sort of putting together a kind of core of people, an expanding core of people who understand Austrian economics, who work with it, and kind of working within that group to kind of go from the inside out. Okay, and again, this notion of internalists is a matter of degree. I'm going to contrast this in a minute with another kind of approach. Okay, now this is one way I think to do it. The faculty associated with the Mises Institute, and again, the Mises Institute is not, it's a separate institute. They are at Auburn University. Auburn used to have a PhD program. It no longer does. You can get a master's there now. There's a couple faculty members at Auburn who are interested in Austrian work, but the institute itself is separate from the university in a way that is not true of other places. And there's a number of faculty associated with the Mises Institute who are fellows there. They don't actually, some are located there, but most of them teach at other colleges, but do work with the institute. Many of those people do lots of things. They have their own summer seminar and things like that. They're less involved in the economics profession than other Austrian economists are. They're more interested, again, in this sort of internalist idea of, I don't mean this in a bad way, but of talking to themselves. That is, of talking to people who come to their programs and who are interested in what they're doing, and to the general public as well. And I think that's one sort of plausible strategy for advancing the ideas. The other thing here is that their focus is heavily on Mises and Rothbard. Okay? Obviously, the name Mises Institute is suggestive of the first half of that, but certainly the work of Mises and Rothbard becomes the platform from which they do their work and the sort of ideas that they have. And again, if you've been to that site and you've read some of their stuff, you know that's the case. And as I said, they're less interested in interacting with the economics profession at large. They're more interested in sort of building their own institutions, their own process, their own kind of way of doing things. And again, that is one plausible strategy for advancing the ideas, particularly if you think the economics profession is not open to Austrian ideas, if you think no one's going to pay any attention to you and that economics is in such bad shape that you have to kind of make an end run around it. this is certainly one way to do it. They have a blog. If you've never seen it, it's called the Mises Economics blog. That is the URL. Pretty easy to remember. It's a lively place and attracts people from all over the world in the comment section for sure, including folks like me who head over there once in a while to engage with my colleagues. So again, you can check the blog out if you get. If you have an RSS reader, you can get the feed, whatever you might want to do. Okay, so that's one home to modern Austrian economics. Everything blows around here. The other home, the other group, I guess would be the way to put this, is associated with George Mason and SDAE, which is the Society for the Development of Austrian Economics. There's a strong overlap between those two groups. The SDAE folks, members of that group, are largely associated with GMU, and there's George Mason himself on the campus, ready to welcome young scholars of all sorts. One of the things to understand about the program at George Mason, and it's really the economics department at George Mason is what we're talking about here. Not everyone in that department are Austrians. Okay, there are a number of people there who are Austrians. Pete Boettke, Pete Leeson, I think Richard Wagner would count himself as an Austrian. But lots of others who are very sympathetic to what it is that Austrians do, even if they themselves wouldn't label themselves as Austrian economists. Just as two examples, those of you who might know the Cafe Hayek blog with Don Boudreau and Russ Roberts, both of whom teach at George Mason, both of whom I think are, if not Austrians, awfully close, which actually makes me think of three things to say. I should have listed that blog too. If you go cafehayek.com, you'll get to their blog, which is terrific, okay, and very much aimed at the sort of public, not as much aimed at other academics. Two other things I was actually thinking of. Russ Roberts, I don't know if you know Russ's work. He writes econ novels. Okay, he's written 3 little novels that teach economic principles. They're great. In particular, the last one, the most recent one, called "The Price of Everything," is absolutely wonderful. It is a novelized treatment of what I would call spontaneous order economics. And if you haven't read it, you should. It's an easy read. You'll read it in a couple hours. And it's great, and especially if you're a sort of young economics student, taking, say, freshman or sophomore, it's a great book to read. I made it optional for my intro class this year, and it was kind of like an extra credit thing, and about 12 of the students did it, and every single one of them loved it and thought it was very valuable. The other thing I was thinking about while I'm on a digression here, another book that you should read, or at least look at if you haven't before, and it's a textbook. It's The Economic Way of Thinking. It's now out in its 12th edition. For a long time, this was written by a guy named Paul Hayne, who was sort of I would call him a quasi-Austrian, sort of a UCLA, property rights type economist. Paul passed away, 5-6 years ago now, I guess, maybe more. And the book was picked up by Pete Boettke and Dave Perchicko, both of whom are associated with the sort of Mason and SDAE group. And so now it's Hayne, Boettke, and Perchicko is the book. And it's a terrific intro textbook that, as the name suggests, focuses on the economic way of thinking. What Pete and Dave did, is really Austrianize it in many ways. And it's a wonderful introduction to economics. If you're looking for kind of a textbook overview of the basics of economics, micro and macro, it's a great thing to look at. It's called The Economic Way of Thinking. I think the new edition is the 12th, and there's even a paperback version. It's not that expensive. Okay? All right, anyway, let me kind of go back to this. What's nice about the George Mason as a home is they have a PhD program. You can take courses in Austrian economics, both at the undergraduate and graduate level. And you've got lots of faculty members who know what Austrian economics is. For the grad students, they can take a field exam in Austrian economics. I believe they're the only place in the world where you can do that, and maybe at least the only place in North America where you can do that. It's also the home of the Review of Austrian Economics, which is the other major journal in Austrian economics. That's what RAE is, the Review of Austrian Economics. Unfortunately, the Review of Austrian Economics is not as easily available online. There's some old issues that are archived on a George Mason site. The more recent ones, you need a library subscription to get to, although some of us who publish in there will sometimes put our PDFs online on our own websites and things like that. But if your library has it, you can get access to it. If not, it's actually pretty cheap to get it. If you join the Society for Development of Austrian Economics, you can get a membership and the journal for about 50 or 60 bucks a year. So that's not too bad for an academic journal. The SDAE is the Professional Society for Austrian Economists. It is made up of not just faculty members, but mostly professors. And it sort of it grew out of many of the founding members in 1996 were people associated with George Mason. So we've been around for about 13 years. It has about 100 members. Again, mostly academics, but also some people from the policy world and grad students as well. The SDAE meets every year at the Southern Economics Association meeting, so it's part of the of a mainstream set of meetings every year. It's been very successful with those meetings, usually 10 or 11 panels, and among the most well attended at those meetings. And that's been going on again, I think, since the late 90s. This group, sort of contrasting it with the Mises Institute, pursues what I would call an externalist strategy, okay, which is a matter of trying to bring the work of Austrian economics into the economics profession, into the mainstream or at least in contact with the mainstream of the discipline and other heterodox schools of thought, right? Other folks who are doing things outside of the mainstream. The focus, I think, of this group is more on how do we make contacts with other economists, how do we change the way economists do business, how do we work with the profession in those kinds of ways. If you're a blog reader, I think someone mentioned this last night, but austrianeconomist.typepad.com is the blog. That's the bloggers there: Pete Betke, myself, Dave Perchico, Pete Leeson, Chris Coyne, Frederick Sauté. And again, that's a pretty active blog as well. The other thing I'd mention is that there are other places around the world that are, I think, pursuing this same broad agenda. I would mention folks down at Francisco Marroquin in Guatemala, Aix-en-Provence in France, and other places in Europe. Some of the Europeans here could probably name them. Spain is another place as well. So there's all kinds of work in Austrian economics, academic Austrian economics, going on all over the world. As you might suspect, there are some substantive differences between these two groups of Austrian economists. I'm not as interested in talking about those as a focus this morning, but we'll talk a little bit about it later on, and certainly it's something we can talk about in the Q&A. So that's where Austrian economics is being done. So what are the key areas of research? What are Austrians exploring in their work these days? What are the questions that they're looking at? I could have generated a really long list of a dozen things here. I decided to kind of, for the sake of time, focus on four. The first being the evolution and role, evolution and function of institutions, work on economic development, money, macro, Austrian cycle theory, and then entrepreneurship and the theory of the firm. So let me sort of turn to those, and what I'm going to do is kind of go through these fairly quickly and just give you a little flavor of the kinds of questions, the kinds of issues and things that Austrians, people doing Austrian economics, are talking about these days. So evolution of institutions. The fundamental question here is, how do economic institutions evolve and maintain themselves? Okay, and clearly the emphasis here, or the inspiration here, comes from Hayek's work on spontaneous order theory. You can think of Menger and the evolution of money. All this sort of work coming together to look at how institutions, how various property rights, how the firm, how other kinds of institutions evolve and maintain themselves over time. And in particular, we want to know is, how do they contribute or detract from economic well-being? Okay. There's the connection to spontaneous order theory, right? Which is, how is it the case that when institutions evolve on their own and emerge from the bottom up, that they do a better job contributing to human welfare than ones we try to design from the top down? And if that's the case, can we find examples of this? Can we understand how it is that institutions do this work by talking about things like knowledge and calculation and all the things that you've been hearing this week? One of the other interesting questions is, are institutions self-enforcing? To what degree will these sort of spontaneously evolved institutions find ways to enforce their own rules? The best example of this sort of thing is eBay, right? Thinking about how eBay works, okay? And the way in which the reputation function on eBay, right? If you get all kinds of bad seller ratings, right? People not going to buy from you. And that ability to comment on sellers, right, or on buyers, is a way of providing that sort of self-enforcement of rules and the self-enforcement of institutions, okay? And so one of the questions many Austrians are looking at is how governance in these institutions work. How do institutions enforce these rules? You can see there's obviously a kind of political dimension to this work, right, which is suggesting more broadly, right, what role is there for government if institutions can evolve in ways that are self-enforcing? And are the self-enforcing rules within institutions more effective at generating good results than, again, top-down sort of government kinds of direction? So there's all kinds of interesting questions here. One of the younger folks, Pete Leeson, has this brand new book out on pirates. You may have seen some stuff on this called The Invisible Hook. Get it? It's not the invisible hook. And part of big Pete's focus in that book is how the rules, even the rules by which pirates operated outside the law, were themselves subject to these internal kinds of self-enforcement and so on. Fascinating and well-written, enjoyable book. This question, this focus on institutions, is a key differentiator from mainstream economics. Mainstream economics, again, as the Paul's last talk suggested, is sterile in this way, right? It doesn't talk about how real-world institutions work very often. And that's a question that Austrians and others, new institutionalist economists, have been interested in for a number of years. And in particular, for Austrians, we understand that institutions have cultural and historical embeddedness. They come to us historically. We have to understand how they evolve. We have to know how money evolved, to understand how money works today. We have to know how particular systems of property rights came to be. We have to understand how central banks emerge, right? All these sorts of things. Institutions have history and have cultural embeddedness. They're not just products of sort of rational maximizing optimization. And this is a key difference between how Austrians look at these institutional questions and the mainstream does. And you can see lots of opportunity for rich exploration here in looking at how those institutions have evolved and what the implications are for how we understand the world today. Let me say a few words about economic development. Clearly, this is related to the question of issues about institutions, right? If the basic question in economic development is why are some nations rich and why are other nations poor, certainly we need to understand that in terms of the institutions that those countries have. Okay, and we're particularly interested, I think, in the question of how did the wealthier nations become wealthy in the ways that they did? And certainly this is related to the death of the central planning style socialism, the Soviet model. For many, many years, that Soviet model dominated how the economics profession looked at growth. Growth had to be led by governments from the top down. But now, Austrians in particular are in a position to say, well, that didn't work. That's pretty obvious. So where is the growth coming from? The old forms of central planning are largely dead, except, I guess, again, in the banking and car business. And certainly in the rest of the world, in the third world anyway, right, we see less and less faith. So what's the new model, right? What do we do now? How do we think carefully about how we get out of poverty and how wealth happens? And one of the things that some Austrians have done is looking at the success stories. What countries have done well in the last decade or two? Ireland, Botswana, some other places. And what younger Austrian scholars have done is to put Austrian economics in play by using it to try to explain those success stories and why it is that those countries did better than others. And again, the focus here is on the sort of roles of legal institutions, of money, of property rights, all the sorts of things we think would be important, and understanding how those institutions again emerged and how they're facilitating growth in those countries. It's also important, I think, to look both at the formal and the informal institutions. And this is a place where what Austrians do is often different. It's one thing to say, well, what are the regulations? What does contract law say? But it's another thing to say, how do people really behave in marketplaces, right? Let's go actually see how traders in Ghana behave. Let's go see what the real norms governing economic activity in Botswana look like, rather than what people say they are. And this distinction between the official and the unofficial, between the formal and the informal, is important. We know that what guides people's behavior often are the informal norms and institutions that they follow, and that becomes crucial for understanding growth. And again, you can see how this sort of comes out of looking at people's attempts to improve their well-being, right, and how through these evolutionary spontaneous order processes, they develop ways of doing that. And what this means is for a lot of younger Austrians, in particular, and older ones too, economic history and what we might call analytical narratives, that is, using economics to tell a story about economic growth and development, has become a kind of key piece of the work that they do. And I think that's really important, just as a rhetorical point, right, or as a matter of rhetoric. If you think about why people often have views of what policymakers should do that we as Austrians or as libertarians think are wrong, okay, I would argue that almost all the time it's because they have a bad understanding of economic history. And certainly the number one thing on that list is misreadings of the Great Depression, right? Look at the mess we're in right now and how much that's come from what people think they know about the Great Depression. And telling better stories about economic history and using Austrian economics to do that, that's, if you read Menger, that's what he thought theory was for, right? Was to do better history, to offer better explanations of the world, right? And I think this is what we're seeing many Austrians doing right now, is going out both in the United States and other places and using the theory to tell better historical stories that really give us a better sense of how these institutions operate and, again, where wealth comes from. Okay. Money, macro business cycles. Obviously, this one, with the events of the last year, is a huge opportunity. When all these guys, Rahm Emanuel says, crises are opportunities, right? I agree, but not for the same reason as they do, okay? Now, crises are opportunities for us as Austrian economists to continue to press the point that we've got a better explanation for what happened and how to get out of it, or what not to do, than other people do. But we can't just go around repeating the liturgy, right? We can't just say the same old things. It's an opportunity for us to expand our understanding of how cycles work. Think back to Paul's lecture from the other day. But to apply that, okay, to the current crisis, right? And the crisis seems the story that we can tell about the current recession. I hate calling it a crisis because that just feeds into politicians taking advantage of it. But how the current recession came about, okay, seems to fit an Austrian cycle theory story pretty well, okay? But not exactly. At least there's no, if you read Mises and Hayek, you won't see anything about the housing market in it, really. So how do we account for the role that the housing market played in the current crisis? Well, we have to ask questions. What are the core elements of the theory? What elements are contingent? Gene and I have a co-authored paper that'll get published next year that asks some of these kinds of questions, right? And how do we apply the theory to sort of novel situations? And I think the other thing that Austrians are interested right now in talking about is how does Austrian cycle theory differ from the mainstream? And why is our explanation so much better? I think one of the answers to that, you heard me say it last night, you heard Paul say it again this morning, is the micro-focus, especially the role of capital. No other school of thought in economics takes capital seriously the way Austrians do, and has, as I would argue, has nearly a good understanding of it as Austrians do. And that enables us to say things about inflation, about boom and bust, about recessions, about how not to get out of recessions, how to get out of it, that other schools of thought can't say. And I would argue that people who misunderstand Austrian economics, particularly Austrian business cycle theory, it's almost always because they don't understand this. And we have to keep doing a better job of clarifying what it is that we're talking about. I also think that our understanding of inflation and the effects of inflation is a key differentiator here as well, and one that we need to keep pressing on and keep developing over time. And there's some interesting questions that we might ask too. Certainly, if you read Austrian business cycle theory, you won't see anything about derivatives, you won't see anything about mortgage-backed securities, right, credit default swaps, and all these other things that have gone on in the last few years. So we need to be thinking about how does the evolution of these modern instruments and institutions matter? How can the theory incorporate into it those kinds of questions, right? The question that was raised in the last session about expectations, I think that fits into here too in some ways. How does Austrian cycle theory deal with all these new sorts of issues that the current recession and other events have thrown up to us? And then finally, this is some things we talked about last night, but the question of alternative monetary systems, right? If the Fed is responsible for this cycle and the problem we're in right now. What do we do? What are the alternatives? How do we understand those alternatives? Internal debates among Austrians about what the best alternative is, even as we agree central banking is a problem. But this is another way that Austrians are getting into the conversation by saying, look, people are raising all kinds of questions about the Fed. We need to be part of that conversation. Okay? Fourth category, entrepreneurship and the firm. This has been a series of issues that Austrians have been interested in, for years and years and years, and continue to be interested in over the last 10 or 20. There are also topics that have a great deal of interest among mainstream economists, and again, Paul and I were on the same track in management. I was saying at the break to Paul that there's a wonderful book, if you're interested in management stuff, there's a wonderful book. The guy's name is Matthews, last name is Matthews, I think with one T. I can't remember the exact title, but it's something like Strategizing, Disequilibrium, and Profit. I think if you Google Matthews with one T and strategizing or disequilibrium and profit, you'll find it within a couple minutes. It's published in 2006. It's a wonderful little book, very explicitly Austrian, and sort of puts that Austrian economics to work in how firms engage in strategic management type questions. Really, really good stuff. Okay, so again, those topics are out there and interesting to people. And certainly, you had a talk. I guess Larry White talked on Kerzner and Kerzner's work. And starting from that, questions Austrians are interested in. How do we explain the emergence and structure of the firm? How do firms work, right? If starting from what we know about entrepreneurs and how we understand institutions, how do firms work? Okay? And what exactly do entrepreneurs do? How are they different from managers? Okay? And what are the real contributions of entrepreneurs? Does Kerzner's and the Austrian theory really explain something that other people can't? A lot of talk about entrepreneurship in business schools and all over the place. What can we add to that conversation where there are Austrians in those conversations? Then the broader questions, entrepreneurship, coordination, economic growth. How do we foster entrepreneurship in less developed societies, right? What role does entrepreneurship play in economic development and contributing to economic growth? What's the relationship between the political sector and entrepreneurship? The kinds of questions we're seeing in the U.S. economy right now as we see the emergence of government motors and all these other sorts of things. Okay, what is that doing to entrepreneurship? And link it back to institutions, right? How do the institutions, how do legal institutions, how do political institutions affect firms and entrepreneurs? Under what kinds of environments are entrepreneurs more effective, less effective? All kinds of good questions there. And then there's sort of what we'll call Hayekian themes about knowledge. All right, how do firms contribute to the knowledge-generating effects of the price system? And an interesting set of questions, I think, is what are the differences? How do firms relate to the market? And inside the firm, right? Can firms get so large that they don't work top-down, and that we want to build into firms elements of sort of bottom-up, spontaneous order kinds of structures? Again, I mentioned Frederick Sauté, who's one of the bloggers at the Austrian Economist blog. Frederick has a terrific book on this from, I think, 2000, a book on again, using Austrian economics to talk about the structure of firms, okay, and how firms organize themselves. All kinds of interesting questions there. Questions that are being debated by the mainstream in economics and in management that we can and are, as Austrian economists, contributing to. I should emphasize, and as I said at the outset, the four things I've just talked about are certainly not exhaustive of the work that Austrian economists are doing. I just picked four that I thought were sort of representative and gave you kind of a flavor of what Austrian economists are doing today. But there's lots more out there that's going on. Okay. Third question that I posed at the beginning. What's the relationship between Austrians and the economics profession? I've already suggested that there's different views among Austrians about how and to what degree interaction with the economics profession is a good strategy or a bad strategy and so on. What I want to do is just kind of run a list of sort of facts, things that are true about this relationship and how it's changed in the last 20, 25 years. And you can sort of evaluate them in any way you want. As I mentioned earlier, the Society for the Development of Austrian Economics has these sessions at the Southern. They're very popular. Every year, the society gets about 10 or 11 spots. That's a major, I mean, the SEAs are a major regional meeting, okay? And there's hundreds of economists there being exposed to Austrian ideas. And the work that Austrians are doing is on display. One of the sessions there is a panel of graduate students who submit papers to a paper contest, and so their research gets exposed to a larger audience. So that's one key point of interaction, and I think a place where non-Austrians see what Austrians are doing and begin to understand that we're actually doing good work. Another organization I haven't mentioned yet is APEE, Association for Private Enterprise Education, known as APPE. APPE is a kind of umbrella group it started as people who held chairs in private enterprise education, and over the last 10 years has just exploded both in North America and worldwide as a kind of as an umbrella group for, I would say, free market economists for the most part. But it's got some different twist to it. One of the twists is that there's often panels that involve teaching, and the communication of economic ideas. But what's nice about APPE is that Austrians and new institutionalists and sort of all people, public choicers, monitors, folks who are generally kind of free market oriented, all like APPE, all go to the meetings. By the way, one reason I like APPE is that every other year they're in Las Vegas. So for me, that's a must go, okay? Because I got to get my blackjack fix in. All right, but APPE, the panels are generally very good. It's an opportunity for Austrians to interact with other people both around the world, but people who aren't Austrians. Again, the quality of papers has gone up. It's become a terrific place for Austrians to present their work and have it exposed to other people. We also have tenured faculty in econ departments all over North America in ways myself, when I graduated, I got out of graduate school 20 years ago, never would have thought possible. There's Austrians tenured at liberal arts colleges, very good liberal arts colleges. There's Austrians tenured at state universities. There's Austrians tenured at major econ research departments, right? Just everywhere, okay? And that's a major victory, all right? 20 years ago, I mean, let me go back even farther. If you go back to, say, the 1960s, you could have counted the Austrian economists in North America, on one hand. Literally on one hand. All right? And even if you went worldwide, you maybe used part of your second hand, but that was about it, okay? And certainly if you think in ones who had teaching positions at universities, right, very small number. Now, it's dozens, if not, in the hundreds, okay? And that's an amazing accomplishment. And just to point out sort of how far up the ladder we've gone, Pete Leeson, who I mentioned earlier, who's a young Austrian at George Mason, is spending the coming year at the University of Chicago at Gary Becker's microeconomics seminar there. That's about as high as you go, okay? And here's a guy who's an explicitly sort of Austrian, Misesian, and radical libertarian, but who's been able to do very well in the economics profession without selling his soul, right? And sort of has got that far. That's an accomplishment I don't think we would have seen. I didn't think people thought was possible, say, 20 years ago. One of the other interesting developments recently is that we're seeing more and more undergraduate programs at a variety of liberal arts colleges. There's some folks who've been throwing money into this project, funding guest speakers and programs and reading groups. I have one at my university where we're trying to attract in undergraduate students into Austrian economics into these sorts of ways and sort of free market ideas more generally. So that's a new development. Austrian economists serve as editors of book series and journals, and not just the two Austrian ones that I mentioned before. Okay, I serve as the associate editor of a journal called the Journal of Economic Behavior and Organization. They publish some Austrian stuff, but that's not their mission. Okay, and other Austrian economists do the same kind of work with all kinds of different programs all over the place. Austrians are publishing in good non-Austrian journals in economics. In the history of economic thought journals for sure, okay, but other ones as well. Journal of Political Economy and places, Economic Journal, other places like this. Austrian economists are involved in professional societies like the Southern Economic Association, like APPE, like the History of Economic Society. Austrian economists have served as presidents or officers in those organizations as well. So again, very much involved with that. We Austrian economists are having panels with other groups like the Eastern Economics Association. Again, trying to get involved. And I think one of the most important ways that we have engaged other economists, interestingly enough, is blogging. If you looked at the economics blogs, you'd swear that the discipline of economics was about half Austrian. Okay? And that's really good. That is us as Austrians believing our own theory and exercising entrepreneurship. Okay? Because blogging is a very effective way of communicating ideas. And Austrian blogs and the related ones like Cafe Hayek, again, among the most widely read in the economics. Marginal Revolution, Tyler Cowen, I'm not sure I'd call him an Austrian, but he's certainly sympathetic in many ways, right? And Alex Tabarrok, who he blogs with, certainly sympathetic, and you see Austrian ideas mentioned in their blog. Marginal Revolution is one of the most read economics blogs in the world. Okay? So, part of that is that the ideas are getting out there, but it's also about interaction with major economists from the mainstream. The best, I think, example of this, it's tragic in some ways, but when Brad DeLong, who is a very famous economist, feels like he has to address Austrian cycle theory, that's a win, okay? Even though he totally doesn't understand it, and he's a jerk, okay? To put it mildly. Oh, that one's on tape, I don't care. What's he going to do to me? I got tenure. All right? I basically said he is on the blog. Search Horwitz, DeLong, Austrian economist. You'll find it. All right, anyway. But the point is, he feels like he has to address it. That's because it's out there. It's because Austrian bloggers are getting it out there. And that's a really good thing. Okay? That's where it's at. And I think the bottom line of this slide is Austrians are part of the economics discipline in important ways. We can't be dismissed. We're in there playing the game, part of the conversation. You can make a living being an academic Austrian economist. You can get published. You can get tenure. You can do all kinds of great things doing it. And that's really important to remember. As you guys are thinking, what do you want to do with your futures? Right? Austrian economics is not an intellectual dead end as a professional activity within the economics profession. Okay? All right. Last but not least, this question. I'm going to start by saying this. I hate that term. Okay? I hate that term austro-libertarian. And the reason I hate it, okay, and I don't hate a lot of things, but this one I hate, because it runs together two things that I think have to be kept distinct. Okay? That's Austrian economics and libertarianism. I know what this phrase is trying to get at, which is that it's a version of libertarianism that's influenced by Austrian economics, and that's fine, okay? But there's problems with this term that I want to talk about, and why I think it's important that we keep the two things separate as we talk about them. First of all, libertarianism is a political philosophy, okay? Austrian economics is a social scientific framework for understanding the world. Those are two different things. They're not the same. Okay? And what that means is that not all Austrian economists are libertarians, believe it or not. And certainly not all libertarians like Austrian economics. There's a strong overlap. No, right here. Okay? And almost everyone that talked this week. Okay? But the strong overlap doesn't mean they're identical. And doesn't mean that it's not important to disentangle them as we talk about them, okay? If you talk to people who are, even academics who are libertarians and classical liberals in the broadest sense, right? Some of them like Austrian economics, but many of them don't, all right? And people have different emphases, right? For example, there's many libertarians who are natural rights people, right? Who don't really care about, the sort of what we might call consequentialism, don't really care about those issues, okay? And they have a very different take on what Austrian economics is about. My big concern, though, is that pushing these two things together, that running them together with austro-libertarians, pushes sympathetic non-libertarians away from Austrian economics. Okay? And this is the point I want to make here is that I know economists, right, who would never call themselves libertarians, free market, classical liberals, but who find Austrian economics really interesting and valuable and want to learn more about it, okay, and use it in their work in some ways. But when they see things like this, when they see people running those two things together as if one and the other are sort of fused, then they want to back off, okay? They say, well, no, I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in an ideology. a political philosophy. I'm interested in the set of tools that Austrians have for understanding the world. And if to do that, I have to buy into the rest of the thing, I don't want to do that. And this, I think, again, this is my view, my take on this, pushes them away. Okay, that running together, that confounding of the two pushes people away. And they begin to ask themselves, well, maybe all this Austrian economic stuff is just some ideological cover for libertarianism. And when they start thinking that way, we've lost them. Okay? If the idea is that if people who begin to find and have an interest in Austrian economics, but who don't go this way, okay, the more they read, the more it might happen that they find it persuasive. And the more it might happen that they kind of start moving this way politically. I can think of, I know people for whom that's happened, okay? But if at the beginning they were sold a package deal, I think they would have run the other way. Austrian economics is a set of social scientific theories, a social scientific framework for understanding the world. It throws some other pieces into the puzzle. It can lead to these conclusions, okay? But they're different, they're distinct. And again, as I said before, part of this is that there are libertarians who don't so much care about the sort of economic, social scientific side of things. If you really believe in natural rights, right, what difference does it make what economics teaches you? If people have rights, you got to respect them, end of story. Okay? And I think I find it interesting, right, when people who really believe deeply in natural rights start using all kinds of economic arguments to defend their political beliefs if they're libertarians. Because I think to myself, what do you need that for? If you believe in rights, you believe in rights. What do you need to tell stories about why rights lead to good consequences? Right? If you have a moral theory of rights, what do you need those for? Now, I think there's some ways you can bring those two together. Okay? But I think this also is relevant to this Austrian economics libertarianism discussion, which is to think about what it is that drives people's libertarianism, their classical liberalism. Okay? And to the degree they are classical liberals because they think a free society delivers good consequences, they don't necessarily believe in natural rights, then they're likely to sort of want to use economic and Austrian economic arguments. But other people might see it differently. I couldn't really have this slide without mentioning one person, and that's our friend Ron Paul. Ron Paul's presidential campaign, whatever you think of it, certainly brought Austrian economics into conversations that it hadn't been in before. And I think that by itself, ceteris paribus, is a good thing. Okay? But at the same time, it's kind of responsible for this mushing together, right, of the politics and the economic theories, as if what it means to be an Austrian economist is to share Ron Paul's or some other person's political views. And I think so. There's a good thing and there's a bad thing there. And I'm not. This is not a condemnation of Ron Paul and Ron Paul's campaign, but I do think there's at least two sides to that we need to be conscious of. His prominence made a lot of people aware of Austrian economics. That's a good thing, okay? But understanding what it is and how it's different from the political philosophy is another, okay? And don't misunderstand what I'm trying to say here. I'm not saying one can't be an Austrian economist and a libertarian at the same time. One can. Many people are, including many people in this room, all right? It'd be very strange for me to say that. But what I am saying is I think you have to keep them distinct. And you have to remember which hat you're wearing when you say certain things. And we strive in the social sciences to be to adopt a version of at least value freedom. Okay? We want to understand the world. We want to explain why things happened the way they did. That's a different question from saying what should we do. That's a separate question. All right? Economics can only tell us if this, then that. As Mises used to say, look, if you value prosperity and peace and social cooperation, then you should do these things, like adopt a free market. But if you don't care about peace and prosperity and social cooperation, then there's no reason for you to like free markets, right? You can do whatever you want, destroy civilization, okay? But if that's what you want to do, your values are different. Our job as economists is to say, well, if you value X, here's how to get there. If you value Y, X won't get you there. And so I think one of the things to keep in mind as we sort of think about this relationship is you get into debates with people, and right, you got to just remember which hat you're wearing. Are you talking to other econ students and trying to explain how business cycles work? Okay? If that's what you're doing, standing there stomping your fist saying the Fed sucks isn't going to be very persuasive. Okay? You're going to have to actually offer a theory about how cycles work. On the other hand, if you're sitting around the bar debating politics, right, that's a different story. You just kind of got to remember which one's which. And I think it's really important not to run them together. And that's why that term grates on my nerves, okay? Because it runs them together in a way that I find problematic. Okay. So what's the conclusion out of all this? Well, Austrian economics, at least modern Austrian economics, starts with these two guys, right? You can't do it without them. And by the way, you can't do it without both of them, okay? Austrian economics is the economics of Mises and Hayek, all right? You got to have both of them there, all right? But at the same time, I think, they have given us a framework. And they themselves, right, stood on the shoulders of giants. Hayek built off Mises. Mises built off Menger and Bumba-Wirth, right? That's what you've heard this week. People like Kerzner built off both of these guys. And so the same is true with the younger generation of Austrian economists, right? We're trying to build off their work as well. Right? And as we do that, right, this is not randomly placed here, okay? As we do that, we kind of covering them up, right? I mean, we don't see them as visibly as we did before, all right? But they're still there, all right? Because what we're doing is saying, all right, they gave us a framework. They gave us a set of questions to ask. We need to pursue that, okay? And we need to pursue it in all the different ways that we can, okay? Asking all these different questions that people are asking. And to be part of that process, to be part of the production of Austrian economics, I think, requires that you understand that it's not a liturgy to be repeated, right? It is a framework, a set of questions, a methodology, a way of doing social science, of doing economics that prompts us to ask certain kinds of questions and engage in certain kinds of analyses. It's also the case that Austrian economics, to be a producer, not a consumer, a producer of Austrian economics, requires deep, intensive learning. There is expertise involved, okay? I think those of us who spent long years eating ramen noodles in graduate school, find it funny when people claim themselves to be Austrian economists, who've read 2 books, okay? And again, that's not arrogance, okay? That's simply the fact that to really produce Austrian economics, to be an Austrian economist, right, requires that you have that kind of expertise. You're all capable of it, okay? And I encourage you all to pursue it as a way, as a profession, as a way of, as a whole life, okay? And as you do, I think what you'll see is that you got to start with those guys and you got to build from them. They've given us a framework. They've given us a great set of ideas. It doesn't answer all the questions in the world. There's plenty more work to do. There's dissertations to be written. There's books to be written. There's articles to be written. There's people to talk to and persuade. And I think the more we take those ideas seriously, the more we understand what Austrian economics allows us to do and continue to push that framework out, the more people will persuade, okay? Now I'm taking off my Austrian economist hat for a minute, okay? And the more people we persuade about Austrian economics, the more I think we persuade people that classical liberal ideas and institutions and values are important as well, okay? So if you're motivated to study Austrian economics by a set of political beliefs, judging by the number of anarchist shirts I've seen in the room, I think that's a reasonable assumption. Okay, but if that's your motivation, that's great. I'll be autobiographical for a second, right? That was me, right? I became a libertarian when I was 16 years old, I read one summer, read Rand and Rothbard and a whole bunch of things all together, like in one summer. Bang, there you go, okay? But that led me to Austrian economics, right? And to this day, why be passionate about Austrian economics? Because I have very strong views about what I think the world should look like, okay? But keeping those separate, letting your politics serve as a motivating force, as a fire that drives you, that's great, okay? But you got to try to remember that's what's driving you, okay? But to really get there, you got to be really, really good with the ideas, explaining them, understanding them, and making those distinctions. And so hopefully for you guys, this week has given you a taste of Austrian economics, a taste of those ideas, of those questions, of those methodologies, of the kinds of theories we put forward. And now it's your task to go out there and do something with it. So we've got about 20 minutes left for Q&A. I'll be happy to answer any question. I say I'm happy to answer any questions. Depends what the questions are, how happy I am. So we'll see. Go ahead. Yeah?
Given your apparent aversion towards simulated compound words, How do you feel about the term?
That's not a general principle.
Anarcho-capitalist.
Anarcho-capitalism. That one doesn't bother me as much. I think it's anarcho-capitalism. That word. One of the things I like about that term is it has a kind of in-your-faceness to it, and it sounds so contradictory that it often leads to really interesting conversations. I think it's a word. It depends who you're talking to, right? I mean, there's some people when you use that word anarcho-capitalism who just hear the first half and go, "What are you burning down buildings? Get out of here! I don't want to talk to you." Okay, but you can have some really interesting conversations with people by deploying that word and getting them to think about, particularly if you're like on a college campus and you have friends who are on the left and call themselves anarchists, right? It's a great word to throw at them to sort of ask them, well, you're an anarchist, huh? So how would you deal with, capitalist acts between consenting adults? You're going to prohibit them? If so, with what? You're an anarchist, right? What are you going to do? Okay, and that can lead to some great, that's the late night dorm room conversation that goes till 4 in the morning. We end up, screaming at the other person and them screaming at you, but it's okay. That's good. Okay, so that term doesn't bother me quite as much. I think there's other audiences, you wouldn't want to use that term with other audiences, but I think it can be useful. Yeah.
Mr. Beckby's book, do you think it's adequate for principles on both sides, micro and macro?
Yeah, I use the Economic Way of Thinking book is terrific for any kind of introductory course. It works best with a one-semester. We have a one-semester intro course at my school, and I think that's where it works best. It is micro-heavy, as you'd expect from an Austrian influence book. There's the macro chapters. They're fewer and I think they're less in depth. But in terms of getting the basics across, it's just terrific. And I didn't used to use it. I started using it this year, and the students just love it. And I've had, my teaching evaluations in intro are the best they've ever been. I don't know what that says. But the students, my sense of what the students got out of the course, why they liked the course, is they really felt like they learned the economic way of thinking, like they able to apply it both to the world, sort of thinking about economic issues and policy, but also to their own lives. A lot of the course for me is getting them to think about how you use the economic way of thinking in action for your own decision making too. And I think that translates nicely back to how we think about opportunity costs. If you understand opportunity costs in your own life, you can easily understand the sort of argument that says, well, if we're spending all $800 billion on a stimulus program, where is it coming from? What else would it have been used for, right? That those kind of questions come very naturally. So I think it's terrific for that. Look, I know it's the end of a long week, but I can't believe you don't have more questions than that after that talk. Yeah?
Is there any one selling point that you've noticed seems to work really well when you're discussing Austrian principles with a non-Austrian?
Again, it's all about rhetoric and audience, right? Who are you talking to, right? So the question was, is there one really effective way to sell Austrian economics? I'd say if you're talking, say you're an econ major and you're talking with other econ students, okay? I think some of the most effective kinds of things you can do is to point out. I think let me kind of loop to it. I think many undergraduates go into economics because they really do want to learn about the economy and often have an interest in politics and sort of find the bigger questions interesting. And they take maybe a really good intro course and they're hooked, right? They're intellectually engaged. And then what happens? Then you go to intermediate macro, and it's like you were running, and now you're in quicksand, okay? And it's tough, and you don't often see what the relevance is because you're solving all these equations and doing all these Lagrangians and moving IS and LM curves around, and you just don't see the point of it, okay? And I think a lot of students give up, right? I think if you get past that and get into upper level courses as an undergraduate, right, things get better. But even in those courses, oftentimes, the disconnect between what you're doing in your economics course and why you thought you were interested in economics is significant. And I think if you understanding some Austrian economics one advantage you have understanding Austrian economics as you go back into your classrooms, let's say as undergraduates in the fall, is that you can see those relationships. You can see what the problem is there, and you can see how economics, when you do it right, really does relate to those things. And I think as you talk to other students, that's a way in, okay? A way in is to say, look, yeah, man, if I have to solve one more Lagrange, if I have to do one more maximization problem, I think I'm going to scream. And this stuff doesn't tell me anything about, what I'm really interested in. And I think you can pull other students in that way, okay? I think, at least with other students, that's an effective strategy. Other audiences, I think it's just, I can't give a sort of one-off answer because it really just depends on who you're talking to. I think one of the hard things, how many of you are still undergraduate and still have a couple years left to go undergraduate? Okay, good. All right. I think one of the here's the problem you're going to have next year. You're going to go back to, if you're econ majors especially, you're going to go back to class all revved up. Okay? You're ready, now you got some ammo. Okay? And you're ready to go. And you're going to be in that classroom and you're going to have one of two choices. Either you're going to turn into the really obnoxious student who raises his hands every 5 minutes, all right? Or you're going to choose your battles carefully. Let me suggest the latter strategy to you, okay? Don't be a pest. You're just going to piss people off, and not just a faculty member, but other students, all right? But choose your battles carefully. And I think at the end of the day, look, you're going to be more effective if you feel a kind of zeal to spread the word. That's good, okay? I think you're going to be more effective with other students than you are with your faculty. And I think what faculty will appreciate is that you're really engaged with the ideas in economics. But you have to really do that in a way that's kind of careful. You don't want to hide what you believe, but you don't want to be a jerk either, okay? And you don't want to turn, what you don't want to do is to turn the class into a monologue between you and the faculty member. It's rude, it's unfair to the other students, and you're going to just really bother the faculty member. But that's what office hours are for, okay? When faculty members say, oh, yeah, I have office hours, take them up on it, go. Then you can be obnoxious, right? Or at least a little obnoxious anyway. Okay, because there's no external cost to other students, just the faculty member, right? If you do that. And that's good, because we like to see engaged students. I love having students come into my office. They don't have to agree with me, but if they're engaged, that's great. And so I think that's, that's a good way to go. I would encourage you guys, who are econ majors particularly, to think about doing things like independent studies, senior research, whatever your university has available to you, summer research, as ways to faculty, a lot of places, I know, again, speaking at least my place anyway, we get paid a little bit if students do that stuff with us, so we like it, we like doing it. But more importantly, it's intellectually interesting for us, even if we don't agree with what you're doing, to have a student who wants to do research and write something and read something. That's great. So I would really encourage you to do that, because if you're thinking about going on to graduate school or anywhere else, right, even law school or business school, having done independent research that way and written about something is really powerful and effective. And there are opportunities to publish stuff as undergraduates that there weren't before. There are opportunities, a lot of schools, I know, again, mine does this, we take students to conferences sometimes, okay? So there's opportunities to get involved in the conversation here in all kinds of ways. And again, in the world of internet publishing, you write something good, somebody somewhere will publish it, even if you just put it on your own website, that's fine, but somebody somewhere will publish it. So there's lots of, it's a really long answer to your question, but you guys, I know the feeling coming out of this week, like, okay, I'm ready to go. Like you're all, I'm probably not thinking it today because you're tired, but I think in about a week you think to yourself, damn, I wish classes were starting. Okay, because you're ready to go and get in there and duke it out. All right, just keep your under control. Be good. Yeah, in back. Yeah, I did not include NYU. Here's what I'd say. There's still, look, Mario Rizzo's still at NYU. David Harper's still at NYU. There's still the NYU colloquium. Gene, you're there every week, right? So there's still stuff going on there. I think, and the blog, that's right. Think markets, too. I probably could have included NYU. Would have made this longer. I think NYU is still good. It's not, I would say, it's not as much of a center for Austrian economics as it was 15 years ago. Kerzner's retired. There's been changes in the department. It's really just Rizzo. There was a time that it was Harper, Rizzo, Kerzner, and Betke there, right? And at that point, I think things were much more happening. But I think it's less so now that Betke's at Mason and Kerzner's retired. He comes in every once in a while, right, Gene, for a colloquium, yeah. So less so. And I think more, it is, and you know, when Mario Rizzo retires, they won't hire another Austrian. I mean, the key is, to them, it's an albatross to that department, and they would like to, I think, get rid of the program. So it's you can still go there and do an Austrian PhD. There's a number of younger Austrians, Glenn Whitman, for example, who did work there, and others. But it's a much, compared to Mason, let's say, it's much harder to do Austrian work there than at Mason. It's much more of a mainstream department. So it's still there, and the colloquium is still terrific. Maybe I'll get down there this spring. And so, yeah, that's another. I mean, like I said, there are other places going on, but I think NYU has kind of slid down the centrality scale in the last 10 years. Yeah?
Are there any Austrian economics textbooks written for economic students?
There are Austrian textbooks written for economic students. I mentioned Economic Way of Thinking, that for at the intro level. I'd recommend Gene's book, actually. Do you want to pitch your book real quick, Gene?
Economics for Real People. It is not written as a textbook. It has been used as one, and a number of people said it's worked out well.
So that's Gene Callahan's Economics for Real People. I got to make sure we get it on the recording.
I think it's only $11.
And it's very explicitly an introduction to Austrian economics and sort of short, what would I call them? Breezy chapters.
Yes, that's what Brian Doherty.
Yes, short and breezy chapters. It's a terrific intro. I think when you get past that, it's a lot harder. There is nothing that I can think of that's been written explicitly as a textbook at, say, the intermediate micro and intermediate macro level. There are books that would be great supplements to that kind of course. Like for intermediate micro, just read, it's 35 whatever years, but Kerzner's Competition and Entrepreneurship, I still think works terrifically.
I'd also highly recommend Menger's Principles.
Yeah.
It's still, it's an intro book because it's the first Austrian book ever written, and it's still fantastic to read.
Yeah, Menger's Principles, I think, can work alongside that too. I'd say on the macro side, I think there's two books out there that work really well as intermediate macro supplements. Roger Garrison's book that Paul mentioned, Time and Money, and I'd like to think my own book on micro foundations and macroeconomics works that way as well. The problem is my book is extremely expensive. I won't even tell you what the current price is. But I will tell you that, and I have to say this carefully, I believe there's still a bootleg PDF version online somewhere. So if you are a clever Googler, you can find it. I make no claims about my own authorization of such activity. But Roger's book is a little cheaper and available. Those make terrific supplements for an intermediate macro course. I mean, there are a couple intermediate macro textbooks that are not Austrian, but approach it from a history of economic thought perspective that I think is very useful for Austrians. Freund's intermediate macro book, I can't remember the exact title, but the author's name is Freund. I used to use a book by a guy named Meyer Cohn. That it's not Austrian, but it has some sympathetic or some similar ways of approaching it to the way things from my talk last night. So yeah, I think, it's an interesting project to think about, is trying to write a textbook for those courses. The problem with doing an Austrian textbook for those courses is this. If I teach intermediate macro, I can't teach just Austrian economics. I have to teach the mainstream stuff. And so I think the strategy of finding a textbook that minimizes the problems and then supplementing it with readings or something like Roger's book or my book from a teaching perspective is the way to go. Trying to write an Austrian macro textbook, I've thought about it. I just don't think you can do it in a way that there'd be an audience for it, right? Except for people sitting in this room. So that's a tough question. The upper level, again, there's no Austrian labor textbook, but for example, or industrial org textbook, but there's lots of books and readings you could do. One of the things we were talking about at dinner last night when the faculty went out to dinner is trying to find a way to organize some of the Freeman articles by topic that would serve as a kind of collection of things you could supplement a course with. And so hopefully Fee will do that, and you might see that on the website there pretty soon. Got time for one or two more? Yeah.
What would you recommend for those who aren't able to attend the school where they have an Austrian
would I recommend for people who are at schools that have sort of zero opportunities in Austrian economics? Well, the easy answer is read. Okay, but that's obvious. I think there's a number of things you can do. One is come to things like this, right? I mean, there's an advanced Austrian seminar. I think those of you who've now been to this one, as you get over the next couple of years, should think about applying for that. I think even the Mises University, the Mises Institute has their stuff that they do. I think there's some opportunities there. Institute for Humane Studies does summer seminars. Those are more focused broadly on classical liberalism. So if you're interested in how the economic ideas expand out, that's another thing to do. I think among the best things you can do is read the blogs. That's where the action is. I think if you read the Austrian Economist, I'm pitching my own blog, but if you read the Austrian Economist blog, if you want to read the Mises blog, you can read that. Cafe Hayek's terrific. I mean, there's all kinds of great econ blogs out there that you can read that will keep you up to date on what's going on, that are full of interesting debates. And the great thing about blogs and the terrible thing about blogs is that they're so democratic. Okay, you can get in there and battle it out in the comments with people you'd never say things to if you were standing in front of them, right? I mean, just from a sort of, I'm going to go in there and tell this faculty member doesn't know what he's talking about. Oh, yeah, it's a blog. Okay, and blogs are bar conversations, right? Basically, okay. The comments are anyway. Okay, which is great, but it's also, the democratization of knowledge has its frustrations too, because people say things that often don't know what they're talking about. But that's what's great. Again, that's what blogs are for. People to say things they don't know what they're talking about. So I would say follow the blogs. I'd say if you can follow the journals too. If you can follow the QJE at the Mises site, you can join. You can, as an undergraduate, you can join the Society for Development of Austrian Economics, like $15 a year, right? You pay an extra 40 or so, you get the journal. You can do that. Okay. I think those are all things, all kinds of things that you can do. I think. Staying in contact, whether email or Facebook or whatever, with each other and with FEE and with the faculty who are here is another thing that you can do, I think I love when I get emails or Facebook messages from people saying things like, I'm taking this class on X and we were talking about topic Y, and is there something like Austrians have written where I can understand this from an Austrian perspective? I love answering those emails, okay? So those are kind of things you can do as well. If other people can think of other things, I'd be glad for more suggestions, but it seems to me let me tell you one thing you guys maybe don't appreciate is how good you have it, okay? And I mean that in two ways. I was an undergraduate at the University of Michigan, okay? Not an institution known for its love of classical liberalism and Austrian economics, suffice it to say, all right? I had to go out, and this is in the early 80s, I had to work hard to find things written by Austrians, right? I had to work hard, if someone said something in class, to find things, to be able to understand the other side. You guys have two huge advantages. One, there's way more people producing Austrian economics and good classical liberal social science than there ever were 25 years ago, right? I mean, it's amazing. There's stuff out there all over the place. And you have this wonderful thing called the internet. I had to go to the library, right, or mail something somewhere, right, and find it. Google's your friend, okay? You can find all kinds of stuff on any topic that comes up in class. Just Google whatever the topic is, Austrian economics, right? My guess is after 5 minutes you'll find something usable. So that's a huge advantage that you guys have, and I would never be afraid to take advantage of that and to use that as a way to educate yourself by finding what's out there on the web. That said, of course, the internet. What's the big danger of the internet? Right? There's no quality control. Right? But you now have a sense of where the quality is. You know some names. You know some organizations. Right? You can begin to judge those sorts of things. Right? And you can do. And if you read something and it kind of goes, this sounds kind of weird. Is this really good? I mean, Google the person for do your own little research. Find things out and see where this person, did they teach, or is it Fred's website? Okay, that might tell you something. So again, you guys have power at your fingers that 25 years ago in college, we didn't have. Okay, last question. Courtney.
It's not actually a question, it's that I could suggest something.
Joe, yeah, sure, yeah.
I work for the Fraser Institute, for Music Communications, so this is my
Yeah. So, yeah, Courtney works at the Fraser Institute, and you publish student stuff, right? And you've got other.
I screen them personally.
Yeah, and I can vouch for Courtney. because I've known. Actually, it's funny. Today was the first time we've met in person, though. We've known each other over email for a number of months. One of the things I've been doing with Fraser, I'll just pitch something else of mine, is that they have an Ask the Professor feature. It's diverted somewhere else right now, but for about a year, every month I'd write a short little piece for them and then do an hour of internet chat with student questions. And that, I think, has been a really good experience for students who are at schools who don't have an Austrian thing or a classical liberal thing there, to have a chance to interact with someone. So if someone reminds me by email, I'll post the Ask the Professor link on my Facebook page or somewhere. We can get the word out. Yeah, if you go Fraser Institute, Ask the Professor, you'll find it. And they're right now, actually, I guess I'll pitch the rest of it. What's happening there right now is that they have different people doing it each month based on articles that they're writing in one of Fraser's publications that are sort of introductions to various topics in economics. I just did one on money. People are doing other ones. So there's an opportunity to learn some things as well. Not all of it's Austrian, but it's good. It's good economics.
And if anyone wants to send in any
Yeah. student@fraserinstitute.org. Okay. Well, it's 11:45, which means it's lunchtime. So thank you all, and thank you all for being here this week.